Recently, I received a communication from a woman named Katie Tolarski. She told me a story about the office refrigerator where she works, which is where I work. She said somebody's lunch had been sitting in the refrigerator getting stinky. Because of that, the night cleaning crew threw out everybody's food, including some perfectly good lasagna I had in a nice Pyrex thing. Katie called me on her cell phone from a parking lot outside of Taco Bell. Here's Katie. Okay, I couldn't understand that, but I was pretty sure that she said Greg Hill. Was Greg the guy with the stinky lunch? I had to know. Episode 1. What kind of guy leaves his lunch sitting around for...
Okay, stop.
Excuse me?
You can't turn everything into a serial investigation. You've gotten way too into that show. First of all, it wasn't my stinky lunch. We're friends. You should just accept on faith that I didn't do it. I resent being turned into a person of interest.
Could I believe Greg? I really wanted to. I did. And what I heard over and over from Greg's friends was that, the Greg that they knew, a fastidious, considerate man, couldn't be the stinky lunch guy. But there was one person who had a different version. A story about Greg that was so evil and disgusting that if it were true, I might as well just pack up and...
Are you doing cereal again?
What? No, I'm just tuning my crappy piano.
That better be all it is.
See, did it sound like he was threatening me? This is... I just don't know. I mean, right? It's not me, is it? Next week, more about Greg, a possible weirdo. Meanwhile, today on the show, we focus on the podcast that fascinated so many people. And now he'll talk to you about cereal for 99 cents a minute. Colin McEnroe.
Actually, that intro we recorded back in 2014 when I think it was easier to get people to pay me 99 cents a minute or whatever it was to talk to them about cereal. Although I think I could still get it. I think people are still pretty fascinated by this. So in just a second, we're going to talk to Julie Snyder, the co-creator of Cereal. You may or may not know they're coming to Hartford, not to investigate anybody, but simply to visit with us at the Connecticut Forum at the Bushnell on Wednesday, June 10th. We'll tell you all about that in just a second. Want to just promote forward to the rest of the show. We're going to stay with the theme of journalism, at least for one more segment. Seymour Hersh, you may know, or you may not know, actually, in the London Review of Books, published this kind of searing and massive counter-narrative to the explanation of how Osama bin Laden was killed and caught, for that matter. And by and large, the whole thing has been kind of disregarded. And there's some good reasons for disregarding it, but also some interesting reasons for thinking about Seymour Hersh and listening to what he has to say. So anyway, Paul Farhi is a media reporter for the Washington Post. Will join us for that. And then in the final segment, there's sort of a mark of shame with greatest hits albums. It kind of sort of means that you're parachuting in, right? You're not really engaging with the individual album. You're just rounding up all the hits. We're going to talk about the fact that there may not be as much shame as some people will tell you. All right. But we are very excited to begin here with Julie Snyder, co-creator of Cereal, senior producer for This American Life. Julie and Cereal host Sarah Koenig will be in Hartford at the Connecticut Forum, I said, Wednesday, June 10th. I'm assuming most of you are very familiar with this topic. The latest count that I saw on downloads is a whopping 80 million. 80 million is just a lot of anything. 80 million downloads for this Cereal. For Cereal. It has essentially reinvented the podcast form, or at least breathed a kind of life into it that it never could have imagined. So we're very excited to have Julie Snyder on today. I also should tell you, there's a development in the case. It literally was within the last 15 minutes that there was this development in the case. And neither Julie nor I don't think really knows or understands exactly what it means, although it does appear as though there will be a new set of court hearings for Adnan Syed. But first of all, we're getting ahead of our story. Julie Snyder, for the 6 or 7 people in our audience who do not know what Cereal is, have you developed a sort of 30-second thumbnail way of telling people at cocktail parties?
Let's see. I think so. I think I say that Cereal is about a 1999 murder case where a guy named Adnan Syed was convicted of strangling and killing his ex-girlfriend. They were both high school seniors at the time and living in Baltimore County. And Serial is a reinvestigation back into that case.
Now, there are so many things that made Serial remarkable, and I listened to it in its entirety twice. But I think the most remarkable one, I think the podcast form really invites and does well with a sense of intimacy. So ordinarily, the kind of communication we have from a host, particularly, say, a host that we associate with public radio, is pretty top-down, right? I mean, Robert Siegel doesn't go on the air and go, well, I don't really even know if I understand this story or not, and you know, I'm getting some new information about it that's made me doubt some of the information that I had before, or, in other words, that's sort of not how we're used to being communicated with. But it seemed to me, and I'm sure you've been over this a million times with other interviewers, that some of the allure of this was putting the narrator, the host, Sarah Koenig, and the journalistic team behind her kind of on a playing field in which the listener wasn't too far removed from the front lines.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, there are so many different ways of telling stories, and there are also so many sort of different forms of journalism. So while no Robert Siegel and All Things Considered, you wouldn't hear that, but that's because that's also hard news. And then there's sort of feature news, and then there's what we do, which is narrative nonfiction. I think you see that a lot more in magazine articles. That's where sort of narrative nonfiction tends to kind of really live, and then books also. I think in those situations, then you do see where the narrator or the reporter a lot of times takes a first-person role. I've been working for the radio program This American Life for about 18 years now. We're no strangers to first-person narrative, even when it comes to reporting stories. So in that regard, for us, it was kind of like a very natural extension. It wasn't like a big decision that had to be made. Although I do think that Sarah Koenig, the host of the show and the reporter, it was more front and center for her. She was more front and center than I think she'd been used to in her other stories. And a lot of times that, you know, the choice of doing that, it comes down to what the individual story needs. And for this story, you know, there wasn't a lot happening. She was for the most part, we're both telling the story about this thing that happened 15 years ago, but we're also telling the story of her reinvestigation. So, you know, then she does become much more front and center. And I agree. I think it's a really intimate medium. Podcast, radio is pretty intimate anyway, but particularly the podcast form, you know, you're even like then kind of a lot of times in earbuds and stuff, that I think that the listeners did feel like they were kind of step by step along the way with Sarah. It's a little bit of an illusion, though, I have to say. She had done, you know, like any reporter, she knows a lot more than the listener knows.
Yeah, I had that sense that in some ways I was being invited to sort of share in her sense of inconclusiveness, and that some of that was, you know, a way of sort of drawing me into the narrative. I should say also that ear, nose, and throat doctors have now identified a condition called serial ear, which people do pick up from their earbuds if they wear their earbuds too long. They try to listen to the whole thing on one set of earbuds without occasionally taking them out. Some infections may recur.
Gross.
Yeah, sorry about that, but it's part of the medical literature now. I think there's a JAMA article coming out today.
We'll have to wait for a new podcast to take on that ailment.
That's right. Well, I mean, the other part of this, though, Julie, was that unlike a lot of reporting of this kind, the final period had not been written on the last sentence of this story when you started. So that, I mean, and I think that this is one of the things that does make it, you know, I mean, when you're reading, say, a Raymond Chandler novel, well, you know, Philip Marlowe, he doesn't know how things are going to come out. So you're kind of going along there with Philip Marlowe. And it is true in this case. You guys didn't really know exactly where you were headed when you left the building for the first podcast.
Well, we definitely, we didn't know when we started broadcasting. We didn't have, you know, a definitive piece of information that answered the question of guilt or not guilty. We knew that going in. We also did know that we had a lot of evidence that the story that was presented at trial was not supported by the evidence. We knew that. So we knew that we had that, sort of justification of looking into the case. We knew that it definitely looked questionable. Like, we had questions about it, but in terms of a clear piece of evidence that indicated one way or the other, we knew we didn't have that. But we also, the reason we kept open the possibility and why we wanted to keep reporting as we were broadcasting the podcast is because we were pretty aware that there was a possibility that more information would come to us as the story began broadcasting. And so we wanted to be able to kind of keep the structure loose and be open to incorporating new information. I think it would have been so frustrating if, we had locked and then people who we didn't even know existed had gotten in touch with us, or people who had declined interviews with us before had gotten back in touch and said, now I do want to talk. It would have been so frustrating to say, oh, sorry, we're done. So we wanted to keep open the possibility that we could always be responding to new information.
There's a lot of stylistic stuff that's very specific to Serial, and some of it is not so specific as it is derived from your tremendous experience with This American Life. But use of music, the use of tape, and in particular, I think the use of tape that really incorporates the vernacular and sometimes near intelligibility of people trying to remember things in the distance. People don't speak like Aaron Sorkin characters. They speak like members of Ozzy Osbourne's family an awful lot of the time. We're going to play a little section of tape here and give you kind of a sense of that.
Here's Patrick again. To him, Jay was this intelligent, inquisitive, sweet, goofy guy, beautifully unconventional.
I think part of me hopes, and then I know this is so terrible to say, I hope in some way his hand was forced, that he had no choice, or that things were outside of his control, and maybe that he was looking out for the safety and well-being of others, and that he wasn't such a willing participant if he was. And I certainly hope that he wasn't.
That grappling you can hear in his voice, that's so common among this group of friends. People like Laura who can't imagine Adnan killing anyone, but also can't imagine Jay doing what he said he did, or why he would lie about something so huge. If you're Laura and there's no scenario here you can rationalize, you're left with fog. This piece of tape I'm about to play you, it's my favorite piece of tape from all my reporting so far, because I relate to it so precisely. It could be me talking to Laura instead of the other way around.
Well, then who the did it? Why would, it doesn't make sense. Why would Hay wasn't, I can't, I'm probably just as confused as you are.
A lot of other kinds of radio documentaries, nonfiction journalism, would either not want those pieces of tape or want to clean them up somehow, or do something with all that sort of haltiness and confusion. It seems as though one of the strengths of Serial, Julie Snyder, is, to whatever extent the reality exists as a fog, rather than trying to disperse the fog and artificially impose order and structure on this. You guys kind of joined them in the fog and looked around at how foggy narrative and memory really are.
Yeah, I mean, that, for instance, that piece of tape from the woman Laura talking, I do remember when that happened in the interview. I felt and Sarah felt, we both just felt, you and me both, sister, and that was something that so many people shared, that it felt important to acknowledge that nobody felt like they had clarity. And I didn't know what that meant. That nobody had clarity, and I wasn't sure is it good enough? Do we have good enough? Was good enough decided 15 years ago? Is it good enough now? Or is this too much fog? I think that was a thing we really grappled with the whole year that we were reporting the story,
Yeah. So now you're on the road with this, and I know you're going to some college campuses. What is the show that's coming to Hartford? What are you going to do on stage?
Well, it's interesting. It's been fun to put it together because there was sort of doing it for the year leading up to it, we basically produced it out of the basement of Sarah's house. And so that kind of meant, like blankets and throw pillows thrown everywhere to muffle noise, and pausing recording while our kids flush the toilet upstairs. And we didn't think anybody was really going to listen, because it was like, oh, who the hell knows what a podcast is, And so then when we began to do release the story, and it was such a tremendous success, but also so many people heard it and so many people responded to it. For us, it felt a little bit confusing. Like we kind of had to put our heads down just to get through the episodes and writing everything and producing everything. And it really took a little time for us to kind of feel like we had a better sense of what just happened. So that was what was really great about putting together the show, is because it kind of forced us to think about it and articulate it. So part of it is about, why did this happen? Why do we think that the first season of Serial, why do we think it resonated with so many people? What were the things that we did that were by design, that we intended? What are the things where we really felt like we didn't intend it? There was a moment where we really felt like we were losing control of the story. And so we talk about that and our feelings about that. We play tape from the show. We do some behind the scenes moments. And then we kind of talk a bit about the lessons that we've drawn from our past experience that went into making the show, but the lessons that we've just taken from doing the first season, because now we're moving forward and reporting. We're actually right now kind of simultaneously reporting seasons 2 and 3. So the lessons we're sort of taking as we're going forward now.
You'd be crazy to change any of the things that contributed to that level of success. So are you crazy? Are there things that you did in the first season that you're thinking, wow, I don't know, maybe, just for example, one of the things that, one of the, 100 different sub-narratives that came out here. So a lot of people got very interested in sort of exactly where Sarah stood on all this. Was she a little bit more sympathetic to Adnan than a completely impartial narrator would be? How should we evaluate her narrative? She's sharing a lot. She's sharing a lot of her inner thoughts. Is she sharing all of her inner thoughts? Just questions on what level of reliability should be assigned to her. So as you look at something like that, to me, that's one of the strengths of Serial, is that it does create 100 different conversations, and that's one of them. But are there conversations that you just as soon not create the second time around?
I think on that stuff doesn't really bother me, because I feel really solid in our reporting. And I think that Sarah was incredibly upfront and incredibly honest about what she thought, but also incredibly honest, like you were saying before, about what she didn't know and about her uncertainty. So, and then, I do feel like that our reporting was really solid, so we stand behind that. So all of that stuff kind of I don't have a feeling on that either way. I think some of the online speculation that it wrought. There was a lot of active stuff, like on discussion forums and comment sections and the internet and stuff, and that brought out a lot of I thought pretty irresponsible and uncomfortable speculation about people, not perhaps the kindest judgments on people's characters, releasing private information that seemed utterly unnecessary. That kind of stuff, that is what we would actively be looking to avoid.
But how can you avoid that? In 2015, that monster jumps out of the box, whether you want to keep the box shut or not.
I know. No, I have to tell you that we're really struggling with it as well. The people that that we are interviewing and talking with for upcoming seasons, we're being pretty upfront with them about the fact that this is going to get a certain level of attention, and that a certain level of attention will be brought to them, and that there are certain things that we can't promise them. I think a lot of times with journalists, it is a negotiation a lot of times with the subjects of your stories. There are certain things that they would rather not talk about, and you say, that's fine, we'll move on. It's not relevant to the story. You're trying to make them comfortable within the bounds of the story that you're telling. And a lot of times there are certain things that it's fine. It's not relevant to this, it's either too personal or too private or whatever, and we can move on. I can't make promises that won't get out there now. And that is upsetting, and I don't know what to say about it. I don't know how to put the lid on it. I'm not sure, other than warning people a little bit beforehand. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that you could do is try to create your own central and therefore somewhat moderated and controlled depot for commentary in the hopes that would sort of be a go-to place. And some of these other satellite sites where last names are revealed and rampant unfounded speculation is engaged upon would be a little bit less of a destination. Have you thought about that? Thinking, well, let's get as much of it funneled into where we can control it as possible.
No, we actually, honestly, I hadn't thought about that. No. Normally in the past, honestly, we have sort of shied away from This American Life kind of, I would say more than that, maybe 15 years ago, kind of when everyone first started getting discussion boards, hosted a discussion board. And it had gotten to a point where it is not probably surprising to anybody who's familiar with the internet, but it started getting, vitriol and, ungenerous kind of things. Yeah. And so we shut it down after, because it was like, well, I don't need to host this. And I felt a little weird asking people, we would do these stories on the show where we would try and present, people as three-dimensional people with nuance and complexity and idiosyncrasies and, from various different points of view. And then, I didn't want to be hosting a discussion page where somebody was just going to, just take pot shots at them. So we had kind of gotten out of the hosting of discussion boards game a long time ago. So I don't know. That's interesting. I hadn't thought of the fact that maybe if we centralized it, maybe we could have some more control. I don't know.
I mean, it wouldn't put an end to. I mean, there's still going to be maverick sites and stuff like that. It's not going to put an end to that, but it might keep the eyes more where you want them to be, or where, if you feel anyway that there's some value in trying to moderate certain aspects of the discussion. Hey, very quickly here, because I know that you have to move on and you're busy because you guys are the Beatles of podcasting right now. And I just wanted to quickly ask you, I assume that's something you will deal with at least a little bit in your June 10th appearance for the Connecticut Forum, that you were like doing it with blankets for sound muffles and stuff like that. And now, of course, you have the serial jet, the serial tour bus. You have like it's just like a whole different life, right?
Yes, exactly. Crystal. Yeah, we're, we're not, we're not rolling in it yet. We're not rolling in it yet, but we are. We are trying to get a little sound booth studio thing for Sarah, so that we won't be having to tell her kids to stop walking on the stairs and stuff.
But it has to sort of reach the. I mean, it's hard to be an audio celebrity, but has it reached the point where you guys are, I don't know, stopped in airports or approached in coffee shops and that kind of thing?
Well, not me. I think to an extent, Sarah definitely, when you're a reporter on This American Life, you didn't really get anything at all, Right. So I think she gets a little bit more now, but it's probably still not, it's not a ton.
All right. Well, you're coming to the Bushnell on June 10th.
We're really looking forward to it.
They're going to play all their hits. It'll be great. Thanks so much for joining us today, Julie Snyder.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Julie Snyder, co-creator of Serial and senior producer for This American Life. Julie and Serial host Sarah Koenig will be, as I keep saying, at the Bushnell for the Connecticut Forum on June 10th. Tickets are available. As we end this segment, as I said right at the top of this segment, that startlingly, literally minutes before we went on the air, the state of Maryland in the Court of Special Appeals did, in fact, make a finding or an announcement or a ruling on Adnan Syed's attempt to get a new hearing. And some of this, I tried to read the thing really fast, but A, I'm not a lawyer, and B, I'm especially not a Maryland lawyer. And there's certain ways in which I don't think Maryland law is exactly the same as Connecticut law. Joining us now, though, is the person who really did get the whole ball rolling. She's been with us before, Rabia Chaudhry, a lawyer who did, in fact, approach Sarah Koenig about this case to begin with. She's followed it and continued to follow it. She now has a different podcast called Undisclosed, which goes into some of the other nuances of the case. And so, first of all, welcome back to our show, Rabia Chaudhry.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us real quickly what happened here this shortly after noon, I guess, in Maryland?
Yeah, sure. This is a major announcement. We have been preparing for our oral arguments in Adnan's leave to appeal. Basically, it's been a slow slog. He was denied his post-conviction appeal last year. We essentially asked for another shot at it. It's very rarely granted. In February, they granted it, meaning we will think about whether or not you get to go back to post-conviction court so that Asia McClain can testify. And we were going to have oral arguments and in June, and then that we had to wait for the court to decide. That can take like a year, but the court issued an order today saying essentially we're remanding this. We want it to go back to the court of the circuit court so that Asia can testify. They are canceling oral arguments, and they have said twice in their order that this is in the interest of justice. So they feel strongly that justice was not served because Asia was prevented from testifying for Adnan in the post-conviction appeal.
So this is a potential alibi witness, was actually one of the strains of the story, I think, introduced in the very first episode of Serial. And then the other argument had to do with efficacy of counsel. Is that also still on the table within the scope of this decision?
Well, actually, the overarching argument is ineffective assistance of counsel. And under that argument are two sub-arguments. One is the Asia argument and one is a plea deal.
Right.
So we going back to the post-conviction court, will not only bring Asia in to testify and probably put Kevin Urich back on the stand to cross-examine him, the prosecutor who didn't play so great here, but also we get to bring in more evidence to show that his attorney was really not competent and for a number of reasons, including health reasons, to represent him.
So maybe just quickly, I don't understand the difference between a post-conviction proceeding and, say, a new trial, but they're not the same thing, are they?
They're not the same thing. Because in a new trial, you obviously get to retry the entire case, right? You have fact finders, you have a jury, you're trying to figure out what happened. In this, basically, you're arguing that what happened at trial wasn't right, and we deserve a new trial. So, it's very, very rare that we get to even this stage. Cases get to it's like less than 1% of cases get to this stage. So, if we're able to convince the court that that his lawyer made a mistake in not contacting Asia 16 years ago, then we get a new trial. And for us, that's really major because not so much, I totally believe we can prevail at trial, but I also strongly believe the state will not go to trial again. They don't have a case anymore, and I think they might offer him a plea deal.
All right. Well, Rabia, thank you so much for joining us on short notice.
No, my pleasure. Thanks so much.
All right. So it's sort of an unusual decision in which the plaintiff, Adnan Syed, got what he wanted sooner than he thought he was going to get it. So I'm so glad we're going to talk about this because it's been bothering me since the article first came out. Just a few days ago, maybe about a week ago now, Seymour Hersh, the legendary investigative reporter, published in the London Review of Books a lengthy kind of counter-narrative for the death of Osama bin Laden, saying essentially that it didn't go the way President Obama said it did. It didn't go the way the movie Zero Dark 30 said that it did. In fact, Osama bin Laden wasn't really hidden from Pakistani intelligence or from Pakistani officials. They knew he was there. In fact, the way that U.S. intelligence found out was not through this complicated series of interrogations, but because somebody just walked in the door, basically, and told them about it. Somebody from the Pakistani side walked in and told them about it. And then within this counter-narrative, there's like a whole bunch of other differences between Seymour Hersh's account and the official account, right down to what might have even happened to the body of Osama bin Laden, as well as, and also essentially saying that there wasn't this raid of daring do involving a SEAL team, that it was pretty easy to get in there. Everybody knew they were coming anyway. So one of the questions that I have, Paul Farhi is joining us right now. Paul Farhi is a media reporter for the Washington Post. He's been writing about this. Paul, one of the things that I've struggled with here is, and I think a lot of people have, is should the mainstream press pay a lot of attention to something that Seymour Hersh says, something that may not be sourced in a way that would have cleared the standards of the Washington Post or the New Yorker or a lot of other publications, but on the other hand has things in it with which, if they were true, would be very important to know?
Yes, I totally agree with you. Because Seymour Hersh himself said it, that gets our attention. Seymour Hersh is a great legendary reporter. He has been right far more than he has been wrong, and he's been wrong before. We all have. But he has a track record that is undeniable, and attention must be paid. So in this case, there are certain things that people dispute. There are certain things that people are denying outright. But it turns out that some of the things have some corroboration to them, and this story, might not be true in totality, but there are some interesting elements here, and again, they are really worth paying attention to.
But there's sort of a monster in a box phenomenon here too, right? If you let the monster partway out of the box, if you in the mainstream press decide, well, we really do have to kind of look at this. Well, then you have to really look at it. You have to take this 4-year-old story that was of paramount importance to Americans and say, well, park everything that you assume about it on hold, and we are actually going to re-examine this. And I sense that there's sort of almost an inertial problem here, that there are a lot of big publications and big networks and stuff are saying, really? Like, just go through it all over again because of one guy?
Yeah, well, that is one of the things about this that creates the immediate defensive reaction, which is Cy Hersh isn't just challenging the administration or the CIA, the National Security Council, et cetera, et cetera. He's challenging the media, because the media passed on, perpetuated, and reported these things as well as the official sources. And so, you're really challenging what we have done previously. And I think that is, our ox being gored, and therefore there's a certain, I think, defensive reaction about it. The response with the most integrity would be, let's look into this, let's see what he knows, let's see if some of it might actually hold up, stand up, what parts of it are accurate. You can be defensive all you want, but a better reaction would be, let's go report it out and see if he's got something.
And is that the right reaction partly because of who he is? In other words, if I announced, if I'd announced 2 weeks ago, I actually do have a counter narrative on the killing of Osama bin Laden, and here's what it is, and I have, essentially unidentifiable sources within Pakistani intelligence and stuff. I'm assuming I would be a tree falling in the forest. There'd be no particular reason for the Washington Post or anybody else to pick up their shovel and go, oh, well, if he says that, we better go check it out. Is it some of it is just the clout that Hersh has, even though he's kind of this fractious, tough-talking, and occasionally unbearable presence?
Yes, it's exactly the reason. Cy Hersh, again, is a legend. He is on the order of Bob Woodward of the Washington Post as far as being an investigative reporter. And again, he has been far more right over the years than anything, and far more right on things that startled America and startled the journalism establishment and were counter-narrative. You can go through a long list of those things over the years. Again, it doesn't mean he's right here, but, if a guy like Cy Hersh says it, it's the kind of thing that you're not going to dismiss out of hand, and you're not going to ignore, and in fact, you should all get cracking and find out whether there's something to this.
Although, let's be fair. I'm essentially with you on this, but I could easily have booked somebody else who would have said, no, actually, the fact that Cy Hersh says this is the reason not to pursue it. That he was right about My Lai, he was right about Abu Ghraib, but other than that, he doesn't get things all that right. He fires a lot more arrows than he hits targets.
That's not true. He fires a lot more arrows that hit targets than don't. You can set aside the things that he's gotten wrong over the years and gotten wrong, or at least raised eyebrows as to their veracity previously in recent years. There's a few of those things, but again, over the course of 40-plus years, my goodness, there's no one, or there are very few people with as magnificent a record as his.
So you've described, Paul Farhi, what should happen, which is that, some of the big players in this, the big media players in this, should at least kind of, put a foot out there on the ice and sort of say, I wonder if some of this could be true. Some of this is probably checkable. NBC's already come up, I think, with a partial verification of the sourcing alignment that Hersh describes. So what should happen is that there should be some curiosity. Not to the point of diverting important resources from other stories necessarily. What do you think will happen? Because what seems to be happening is a little bit more the other thing. It's maybe I'm wrong about this, but just looking at the aggregate coverage of his coverage, there's this kind of, well, there goes Cy again, you know.
Yeah, because it takes zero effort to say that Cy Hirsch is wrong, or that, you know, our reporting over the last 5-6 years has been right, than it does to get off your butt and go out and check it. Now, it may turn out that Cy Hirsch is crazy and that everything he's saying is nonsense. But it takes a bit of effort to know that, and we are still in very early days. Hirsch spent a couple years on this piece, so to match him or to verify what he says is going to take more than a few hours of pontification, which is what you're seeing in the first days after this thing. Again, I'm not saying that Cy has all the goods and has all his ducks in a row. It's not that. It's that it's like you ought to take a look at it and consider whether he does. It may not pan out, but even if a little bit of it pans out, that's an unbelievably big story, because it's counter to everything we've been told and everything we think we know about this gigantic story.
So, and just the last question for Paul Fari from the Washington Post. In terms of why it's a big story, I mean, it seems to me that there are, for me anyway, two things that kind of loom up as very important. One of them just has to do with U.S.-Pakistani relations. If Hirsch is correct, the Pakistani government feels as though it's been kind of hung out to dry on this anyway, and that, you know, the Obama administration just told this version that didn't have them in the decision loop in a way that they actually were, and they're not happy about that. And then the other one is that the already shaky CIA narrative about how they got this information, and that maybe some of the forced interrogation techniques were helpful. And this was already a challenged and very shaky narrative. It goes up in a puff of smoke if Hirsch is right that none of it really came from there. This was all just, across the transom from a walk-in.
That's right. But, Hirsch is dealing with people who don't really tell the truth, and for very good reasons, because there's national security, not just of our own, but of Pakistan, of Saudi Arabia, of other places. So it's very hard to penetrate that world. And in this case, Pakistan was embarrassed by the raid, by the Navy SEALs, officially. Pakistan was blindsided officially. What Hirsch is suggesting is that Pakistan, or at least an element within Pakistan, knew all about this and actually kind of stage managed it in the first place. And there's a very good reason why Pakistan, or again, elements within Pakistan, might want to have put out the official "we were blindsided" version, because for domestic consumption, it might be better. Now, again, I'm not saying that that's true, but there's a great deal of plausibility behind that, and that's why I say it's worth. It's the kind of thing worth checking, and there has been some preliminary verification. Take a look at Carlotta Gall's piece in the New York Times, basically saying this element of the story checks out for me. She was writing a book. She ran across some of the same sources as Cy Hirsch. Again, not to say it's true, but boy, there's some interesting evidence here that would suggest it is.
Paul Fari, thanks so much for your time. You can check it out yourself in the London Review of Books. It's available online. In our final segment, we're going to go a little lighter. Some people think it's a shameful thing to own a greatest hits collection instead of dealing with the individual albums of the artist. We'll talk about that.
My favorite greatest hits album, the greatest hits of Phish fans, angrily explaining why it's irrelevant that Phish never had any hits. Today's show was produced by Tucker Ives and me, Kyone Wolfe. Greg Hill appeared in the intro and tweets for us at WNPR Colin, and Katie Tolarski is our executive producer. Our intern is Hallie St. Germain. The part of Bill Curry was played by the Eagles. For show pages, articles, and videos of the Faith Middleton Show staff dancing really hard to Now That's What I Call K-Pop, visit our website, WNPR.org. On tomorrow's show, a look at sexuality and gender across cultures. And now, back to Colin.
What's your favorite greatest hits album and why?
Creedence Clearwater Revival, Chronicle, 20 Greatest Hits.
Bill Withers, Billie Holiday, and Jackson Browne. But I would say Madonna would be another great one.
Bruce Springsteen's Greatest Hits, because it's got all the classic boss numbers. You can't go wrong with all of them, or any of them.
A CD of Gershwin's Greatest Hits that included Rhapsody in Blue, American in Paris, and several of his great tunes.
Definitely In Time by R.E.M., because it's got everything I want in a short amount of time, and I don't have to go switching through my iPod to find each song I want to listen to.
Legend by Bob Marley. It's got a live version of No Woman, No Cry on it that I like much better than the studio version, and I'm sure it exists elsewhere, but I do know that it's on that record, and I own that record, so that would probably be my favorite.
I bought a Greatest Hits album of the Eagles. There, I said it.
That last voice, of course, that of Betsy Kaplan, a person struggling with tremendous amount of Eagles shame, all of which we have foisted on her. She came in here a mentally healthy person many years ago. So Jim Chapdelaine joins us now, a musician, producer, composer, recording engineer, everything. So there is this idea that if you own a greatest hits compilation of some artist, you've kind of parachuted in rather than, if you were to say to John Dankosky, I just bought the King Crimson greatest hits collection, assuming there could even be such a thing, he'd be thinking, well, no, you listen to every King Crimson LP or whatever album.
Completists.
And you learn them that way. You don't do this kind of cherry-picking stuff. I don't know. Do you buy that argument?
No. I like greatest hits. They're the gateway drug for the rest of the music. I think my first record was Ricky Nelson's Million Sellers. And it conveyed to me that the show I had been watching, Ozzie and Harriet, which had a song by Ricky Nelson at the end, you probably remember, with the great James Burton on guitar, was actually a legitimate thing. And so I was able to go and find his other records. And I would say that's probably true of a lot of people, like Frank Sinatra Reprise, Frank Sinatra Capitol. And some of those are put together for publishing reasons.
Steve Metcalf just sent us over the Sinatra Capitol years as an example.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
So, but that's sort of also there's a difference, I think, between an anthology and a greatest hits.
Well, I was going to ask that is because I have a lot of anthologies that have maybe more deep cuts on them.
Right.
And a greatest hits might be put together for financial reasons or contractual reasons, or it might just be their greatest hits. And it's a great way to access an artist who you're curious about, but might not you might pick the wrong album. I mean, if you pick an Archie Shepp record and it's not the right one or something like that, some out loft jazz, it's going to freak you out.
We have our time is finite, but if you did want to call in about your greatest hits album experience, 860-275-7266, 860-275-7266. I think there are other reasons why it's defensible or circumstances under which it's defensible. And you sort of alluded to the sort of the gateway drug phenomenon. Okay, you buy Legend, and then you realize you really like Bob Marley,
which is no longer available.
You can't even get it. Really?
I don't think so.
It was the most mentioned. When we put it out on social media, it was the single most mentioned thing.
I actually have it, but I think there was some sort of copyright issue with that.
All right, let me give you. You've never heard of the Eagles before. You steal Betsy Kaplan's copy, and then you think, I love this band. I'm going to get all their albums.
That would only happen to me in a parallel universe where Brainiac 5 has taken over. And no, I don't think so. That's not going to happen.
But that's
sure, that's a way to get into the Eagles if, in fact, or to say, you know what, I'm listening to this. I'm not really crazy about it. So you might have saved yourself a lot of money.
Concert tickets. And, you have to buy the concert tickets.
Right there is a college education for the Eagles.
But I think a more alluring defense. Charlie Monaghan, the great journalist Charlie Monaghan, saw this topic and tweeted, Buffalo Springfield retrospective.
I sent Tucker a picture of that.
Oh, really?
That was the first one I picked up.
Yeah, because I thought I want that because I really like the Buffalo Springfield.
It's great.
I don't have time. I don't want to listen to all of Springfield. I mean, I wouldn't be unhappy doing that, but in terms of maximizing my remaining years here on Earth, having those 12 or so songs would enrich my life.
It might be more effective if somebody who knew you was the curator of that because they know your particular taste, and then they're going to put a couple of edgy cuts on it. But that one in particular, I sent a picture of, along with a pile of other ones. That's a great best of. I don't even know if it's a best of. It's just sort of a retrospective, like it says. Yeah.
Well, I think it's called retrospective anyway, but I think it's the best of. And looking at I looked at the song list and I thought, yes, exactly. Those are the songs that I want. And so and that's sort of interesting too, because you and I are of an age where we have lived through the iteration of a whole bunch of different sort of music delivery systems. So that, I don't have, it turns out I actually do have 17 boxes of vinyl up in the attic of the house I'm trying to get rid of, but I didn't know that until yesterday. Basically, that's one thing we often don't have, right, is the music that we loved in 1967 or something. And so on that basis, a best of is, I think, defensible.
Yeah, it might get you back there enough so it's shaking your memories loose, unless you had fallen in love with every single song on Rubber Soul and worn out those deep cuts.
So, but is there nothing that moves you about the completists' argument that no, every single album is released as an album? I'm going to be Jack Black in High Fidelity or something and say, that you can't do that. You've got to go listen to that album. You cannot just round up all the greatest hits like that.
No, I think that I master records, so I see artists struggling with sequencing. And I can remember, this is a long time ago, maybe 12 years ago, a woman breaking down in tears when I said, listen, your friends will listen to this record exactly the way you intended, and maybe a few other people. Mm-hmm. But there's this new thing on CD players called shuffle. Mm-hmm. And she was weeping because this order was so perfect and so intended. So I explained, you buy their trust song by song, and then they expand out from that. But sure, I'm a completist with certain things, and I have to listen to them in order. But for new things, how do we learn about new things? It's maybe a single cut on the radio, or somebody plays us a song and we're curious.
Yeah, actually, Mr. Dankosky said that back when this enterprise, this building that we're here now, used to do something where I guess people would bring in their albums and their albums would be sold to support public broadcasting or something. The most frequently brought in album, or the second most frequently brought in album, was Dylan's Greatest Hits. And I wondered about that. And I wondered if what that meant was back to the gateway argument, that you buy Dylan's Greatest Hits and then you think, oh, no, actually, I do need to buy like Blonde on Blonde.
Yeah, I have to buy all of this.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's the argument for engagement. So what are your favorite best of your greatest hits compilations?
Ray Charles is a great one. Both Frank Sinatra's are great. The what is it? Beatles #1, the Red. That's great. You can sort of hear this progression happen, and you hear when they get to Paperback Writer, you hear like, oh my God, that's where pop music production changes forever. At that moment, and you hear it more chronologically than you would if you're listening to every single album in a row.
Well, let's hear the other side of the argument. We do have a clip from the Kids in the Hall. The scene is a record shop. A guy's come in. He's thinking about getting into the Doors. It's kind of a retro thing, and he's thinking about getting the best of.
Well, if you become a Doors fan, Love Her Madly is the only song you won't like. All right. I guess I should start with their greatest hits. Hey! Greatest hits albums are for housewives and little girls. You're not serious. You don't want to be a Doors fan. Get out of my store. We're closed. Get out of here. No. I want you to show me the way.
So that's the angry record store clerk argument, right?
I used to work in a record store, so I was that person. It's the only real job I've ever had because it came with health care. And while people were buying Hotel California and Fleetwood Mac, I would always steer them towards Thelonious Monk in the most obnoxious way possible, and or you would check them out as, is this for you?
I would have been so obnoxious in that job. I would have steered them from Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, which, as Tucker pointed out earlier today, is almost a greatest hits album anyway in terms of the number of hits that are actually on it, to like the Danny Kerr one.
Right,
Fleetwood Mac before it was wrecked by those
Bear
idiots.
Bear
Trees are great. Right. I would have been that guy.
Yeah.
I would have been fired like the day after you got fired.
Yeah.
All right, or maybe the day before. Jim Chaplin, thanks for coming in.
Okay, seriously, the greatest hits album of all time, Nickelback's